Hello, I'm Matthew Aldis, and today I'm going to introduce the book of Acts, also known as the Acts according to the Apostles. The book of Acts is a continuation of Luke's gospel, whereas that gospel was concerned primarily with the life and mission of Jesus of Nazareth. The book of Acts is concerned with what the Christian community that comes after Jesus will do with the message and the good news of the gospel. Early on in the book, we witness the events of chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, when the promised Spirit of God falls on the disciples, and then the events that unfold throughout the book of Acts explain the legitimization of this gospel movement and the message of this kingdom that is now spreading, beginning in Jerusalem and traveling to the ends of the earth. The book of Acts is said to have been written at some point between 80 and 100 AD. As early as the 2nd century, scholars, Christians, and writers were attributing the work of Acts to the same individual who penned the book according to Luke. The context for which this book was written is probably to explain how this Christian movement is spreading through parts of the known world. The Spirit is falling on people. They are converting to worship Jesus. This small sect in Judaism is spreading to parts of Egypt and Samaria and Rome, which is the capital city of the empire. And so the activity of the Spirit is examined, and we are in a position to look at these events for legitimization as to how and why this kingdom is moving out to the world. We can think of Acts as a three-part structure, beginning in chapter 1 and verse 1 through chapter 1, verse 26. We get an address to Theophilus, and it sort of closes the gospel according to Luke, whereas the gospel of Luke is concerned with the events that Jesus began to do. The gospel that we see in the Acts according to the Apostles is what the Spirit is doing through the followers of Jesus. The second section in the book begins in chapter 2, verse 1, all the way to chapter 12, verse 25. This is known as the Petrine Christian movement under the Apostle Peter. We see the gospel beginning in Jerusalem, traveling through Samaria on the way to Antioch. Within this section, you will encounter the day of Pentecost, the mass conversion of people to worshiping Jesus. We learn about the stoning of Stephen at the hands of Saul. We learn about the gospel spreading to Samaria. And we also get an inside look at the vision that Peter has and of all of these animals and unclean things that Peter is instructed to eat. And that is meant to be a metaphor and a telling of God's movement into the Gentile world and how God is grafting the Gentiles into this formerly closed-off Jewish sect. And then the third section of the book, beginning in chapter 13, verse 1, and going to chapter 28, verse 21, is the Pauline Christian movement. Saul, who persecuted Stephen, was on his way to Damascus and meets Jesus in a vision and is blinded, and then converts to faith in Jesus of Nazareth, and then we learn about his missionary journeys beginning in Antioch and traveling all the way to Rome, where he hopes to gain an audience with Caesar. And one of the key chapters in that book is chapter 15, in that section, I should say. Chapter 15, the Council of Christians meets in Jerusalem because all of these Gentiles are converting to Christianity and allegiance to Jesus of Nazareth. And the council gathers together to determine what restrictions, if any, they should put upon the Christian community of Gentiles who have not previously followed Jewish law. Do they need to be kosher? Do they need to be circumcised? Do they need to honor festivals? And you'll read about the outcome of that in chapter 15. Some of the themes we want to keep in mind: the Scriptures as a fulfilled promise. The author of Luke and Acts sees the movement that is occurring in Jesus of Nazareth as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. He sees Jesus as the legitimization of prophet, priest, and king who now resides over God's kingdom. The second of which is the Christian story continuing to be told. This is Jesus' story, but as we know, he's ascended to the Father, and so now these events, as they are occurring through his followers, and we see them empowered by the Spirit, proclaiming the message of good news in response to the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And then the third, we need to think about this as the church empowered by the Spirit. The Spirit is the main character in the narrative, always at work behind the scenes, sometimes more prominent than others. And the Spirit is the one that really gives legitimization to this movement. The Spirit is the one who is credited with forcing the disciples out into the world and giving power to their message and causing people to experience new life at the proclamation of Jesus. And so Acts is loaded with action. It is prominent and applicable for our times, and I hope that you gain some insights that will help you better understand the community to which we belong.